You, Phil, said to me, just as you came around to watch the trailer that we're about to play, you were really excited about this because it's Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, I love Studio Ghibli. I love the style. I love the care that they give to their animation projects.
Yeah.
And I was really excited by the idea of somebody who wasn't from the Studio Ghibli sort of mold coming in, but working with Studio Ghibli to produce a film. And you can tell from the art style in the trailer and just around the film that there is something different about this project. It's not the usual thing, but it's still Studio Ghibli, so you kind of have this kind of excitement around it.
Okay, how interesting. All right, I'll come on to some of the things you said in a minute or two. Listeners, this is a film that was released last year, and it was nominated for Best Animated Picture at the Oscars. It didn't pick up the Oscar, but it was in stiff competition. It did very well at the Cannes Film Festival, and unusual for an animation to do as well as it did at that festival as well. Very rare for them to be selected there, so I hear. And it's a film by Michael Dudok de Wit, who is a Dutch animator, director and illustrator, so he's sort of the full house in the animation department. And the way that he describes it, Phil, Studio Ghibli contacted him.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
And they said, we love your short films, we'd like you to make something. So it was really interesting to me that you said this is Studio Ghibli bringing someone in. It isn't really that. This is Studio Ghibli saying, we'd like to part finance and produce your film. So it was made in Europe. It was directed by him, and he, in a Q&A, fantastically chatted about the meetings he had with Studio Ghibli and took their feedback. But I actually think it's a misnomer and an unhelpful one to say this is a Studio Ghibli film. I think they're doing it because it needs as much publicity as possible. Fairly small budget, fairly not mainstream, it's fair to say. So any kind of hook that can be got out of the marketing, I think, is being pushed as hard as it can. And I think it's really important not to go in thinking this is a Studio Ghibli film, because as much as you might think there are similarities, I don't think it's anything like any Ghibli film I've ever seen.
No, but do you not think it would have some impact on the film? And also there's a sense in which Studio Ghibli would be curators of talent, and so they don't want to identify qualities in other animators and other directors that they like, and so there's kind of a common thread, even if they're completely different styles and approaches.
Common thread, yeah, I don't dispute that at all. They're involved in it. You know, they're the number one sort of presenters of the thing, and Isao Takahata, not Miyazaki. It's interesting that people talk about Miyazaki all the time in the press about it, but it's not really him. It's Takahata, who's the other half of the Studio Ghibli team. He's definitely involved, but it doesn't feel like a Ghibli film. I mean, the fact that there's no dialogue is a real departure. I think when you go to a Ghibli movie, you expect something expansive, imaginative, fantastical, even when it's grounded in reality. And in particular, characters who express themselves a lot. There's a lot to do with youth, isn't there? Sort of growing and changing and confronting the world's issues. You know, you think about Spirited Away, you think about Grave of the Fireflies, right? Almost all Studio Ghibli films have characters who undergo a lot of trials to grow personally. This film, when there's no dialogue, it's almost high concept, like the whole thing. Do you know what I really thought? I'll give it out like this way. It's like a really extended Pixar short.
I mean, yeah, it's slightly ringing bells. I can't remember who did it, but I remember seeing a short film which was basically kind of a reimagining of the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And it was focusing on, you're going to roll your eyes at this, Laurie, it was like man's best friend as a dog, and then the introduction of, and that was kind of very similar, very beautiful, similar sort of aesthetic as the Red Turtle. And I think it was Disney that were behind that. And so this film does have I completely agree, it gives that Pixar film.
Well, and you know how I feel about those Pixar shorts.
I don't know really how to gauge that then.
So let me give you a bit more detail, listeners. This is about a man who, in a dreadful storm, is shipwrecked on a small sort of tropical island. In many ways, it's a very beautiful place, but he's completely isolated. There is not a soul on the island besides him. So he's desperate to escape. But basically, all his escape attempts are foiled by a mystery. He doesn't know what it is to begin with, and eventually he discovers there's a red turtle who is keeping him from escaping. And then from that point on, I don't really want to say too much because I think it'll give it away, and I would advise you not to watch a trailer if you're interested in the film, because I think it's much better to let the film tell its own story in its own pace. But for various reasons, he doesn't leave, and it's about what he does on this island and what his future looks like. But there's no dialogue, so the only word that gets shouted every now and again is "hey," And when there's no people, it makes sense that there's no human dialogue as well. The whole film is presented in a kind of grain. There's this weird texture to all the colours. There is the Studio Ghibli-ish approach of basically only having two tones, a lot of flat colour with maybe one shadow colour. There's a sort of hard line, cell shading sort of approach. But interestingly, and Michael de Wit admitted this, it reminded me more of Tintin than it did of a Studio Ghibli movie, because they've got the dots for the eyes and the face shape is very similar. And he admitted he is hugely influenced by Hergé, who is the artist and the publisher behind Tintin. So I hope that's given you kind of a feel for it. Let's play a trailer. I thought we couldn't play a trailer at all because there's basically no dialogue, but this will give you a great feel for how the film presents itself, especially the music. So here you go. Yeah, there you go. So hopefully that's given you a good vibe for it, listeners. And yeah, it's interesting. I don't actually really know how I feel about this, because I have to be honest, for about the first 20 minutes, I was really bored.
Really?
Yeah, I was really bored. And I was so sad to be bored because I was so excited. Like you, Phil, I thought, I'll see anything that Ghibli put their name to, because they're fascinating and they're so full of imagination, and I want to go and escape and deal with these metaphysical ideas that they always bring up. This film just didn't really have it. It was the kind of high concept thing, like I said, that's more at home in a Pixar short, but felt like a very long one. And you know me, Phil. You know I'm not really one for that kind of high concept thing that doesn't really say anything and pretends that there's great depth of meaning
in the negative spaces.
Yeah, and the thing is, there is a lot of beauty in it. I certainly wouldn't dispute that. And there is a lot of negative space. Michael de Wit admitted he loves that. He loves the sense of space and whiteness and negative space and all that kind of stuff. And the film was quite remarkable for the way that it routinely uses the subject of the frame, being the man or whoever else is in it, and they're tiny. They're tiny in it, and they're because the drawing is so simple, you can see the detail even when they're tiny, but it gives an amazing sense of scale and character to the island he's on. And really the island is as much of a character as this guy, this shipwrecked guy, is in the film. And Michael de Wit sort of admitted that he doesn't entirely have a direct interpretation, Phil, when you think this about this Garden of Eden thing. He says he doesn't have a direct one. In fact, he said this, and he was so earnest and so open. I really liked him and respected him. If anyone else had said this, I would have thought, what are you talking about? He said, it's all about the most subtle of the most subtle in meaning, and it's about the most beautiful of the most beautiful in presentation. And it's something that's kind of, you can't quite grasp it. And there's a lot, and he wants to talk about these themes of separation, which we always experience in life, but then again of unity, and the way that separation and unity are constantly sort of holding hands and breaking apart.
Did he have an accent? Did that
yeah, he
help?
had a fantastic Dutch accent.
Yeah,
as well.
if the accent probably sold it for you.
Yeah, I really can't explain it, but when he says it, it sounds totally authentic, and I really believe that he believes this and is passionate, and I can see why Studio Ghibli was so sort of entranced by him and wanted to help him produce a feature-length film. But I don't know. It's really hard to wrap your fingers around it and get your teeth into it. And there's a real sort of magic element to it that pops up that is not really a Ghibli kind of magic element that I kind of wasn't sure about. By the time it comes to the end, everything sort of gets tied together and you start thinking, oh, is this an allegory for this? Is this an allegory for this? And there's things that are interesting about it, but for it to really carry any weight, you have to have thought, oh, this is beautiful. And you have to have your breath taken away by it. Otherwise, it's just kind of well, that was weird. Do you know, like, it requires you to feel as emotional about it as the director wants you to feel. And I'm afraid I just didn't connect.
Do you think people will connect, though?
Some people will. And, you know, without wanting to sling mud or anything like this, I reckon a lot of people have clouded judgment when it comes to animation, because animation these days is very rare, especially animation that is not kiddie, but is aimed at a mature audience and has depth to it. People want to instantly say, oh, it's beautiful. So do you remember I reviewed The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, which is a Ghibli production?
Yeah.
Actually, Isao Takahata's last production. I didn't really like it. I thought it was really long. And as beautiful as I think the drawings were, you can't just have beautiful drawings in a film. I found it really boring. I didn't enjoy it.
It needs to be a good film.
Yeah, I didn't find that there was enough. There wasn't enough intrigue. There wasn't enough to help. It was a very obvious morality tale and a fable. I slightly felt the same way about this. I think you can get blindsided by the fact that it's an animation on the cinema, and you just say it's beautiful because the last film you saw was Snatched, starring Amy Schumer, or
Yeah.
or the last film you saw was Baywatch. Even, do you know what I mean? Like,
And so it stands out just because it's rare.
yeah, and I really, 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 really wanted to like it a lot more than I did, but I just found it a bit opaque, a little bit contrived, slightly twee. The music's great, and that was the question I asked. It was interesting. I assumed, because there's no dialogue, but music must have played quite a pivotal role in the development of the story and of the sort of direction, because the way that musical cues are hit or not, and the length of the piece and the tone of the piece might affect the way that it's made. But it wasn't like that at all. Apparently, he found it really, really hard to find a musician and a composer that he liked, and it came right towards the end. You know, out of 8, there was just one that he really liked, and that was it. And it was really interesting hearing him talk about it, because even something that is so clearly wants to be held as an artistic work, there is so much practicality behind it. There's just kind of just taking one step at a time, and we can't do that, so I guess we'll have to do this. It's this weird kind of vision, and there's so much compromise involved. So, yeah, anyway, I think that's probably all I need to say on this. I reckon I would absolutely love to know what your thoughts are, listeners, on this one, especially if you're a Studio Ghibli fan, especially if you love animations that have got something to them. I think it's easy to think there's more there than there really is, but I'm certainly really fascinated by and want to hear more from Michael Dudok de Wit, the director. I think he's got a lot to say. I just hope the next one says it in a more convincing way.
What's the grade?
Probably a B for me, yeah, which is the same as I gave Baywatch, isn't it? But
that's way higher than I was expecting.
did you think so? I didn't think it was bad. I just didn't. I wanted it to be much higher.
Is that
I
because
give
your
it a B minus.
expectations?
Yeah, that's exactly why I say I think you mustn't go in thinking this is a Ghibli film, because even down to the nuts and bolts, it isn't really. They're involved, but it's not a Ghibli film, and it certainly doesn't feel like one.
Any bonuses?
Well, I do think, Phil, that if you're going to make a film that has no dialogue in it, have no dialogue in it. There's something I find a bit annoying, or not annoying, there's something that breaks stuff for me, that when no one says anything, and then they do say one word, hey, or they do shouts, it feels like I'm watching an amateur dramatic thing, you know, where someone has written something where they just emote and express stuff and they use wordless sounds.
And then they cheat at the end.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, but it wasn't even that. It's just, I didn't like that. Either have the confidence to make it wordless or give them more dialogue than hey and a shout, because I think it breaks the spell and not in the way that they were hoping.
That's how I felt about The Artist. You remember that silent film?
Yes.
The whole time I was just like, just talk.
Is that how you felt,
talk.
really?
And then they did, and I was like, oh, that was fun.
They talked?
Yeah, they do talk in that film.
Oh.
There's a weird like dream sequence where everyone talks.
Well, there you go then. That's kind of what I mean. I just think, what's that? There's something wrong about that in my book. Anyway, yeah, that's enough.